Hello there, my name is Richard Walker and I am a professional gilder. I teach gilding around the world and it's an absolute honour to be here at the festival in Qatar to show you some of the benefits of using gilding at home. Now, some people think that gilding is just for picture frames, but it's so much more than that. You can use gilding in arts, you can use gilding in interior works, on furniture. In fact, there's no limit to what you can do with gilding. One of the things I like to say is, if you can paint it, you can gild it. But what is gilding? Well, to understand gilding, we have to go back in time to the Egyptians, because it was the Egyptians that really took gilding up to a high level. They would beat gold, because it's so malleable, down to a really, really thin level. In fact, the gold that we use today comes out at about 10,000 sheets of this gold are as thin as the edge of this knife. And the Egyptians were the one that beat it down really thin and would start to coat things with the gold for decoration. Now, one of the things I really like about gilding is where gold comes from. Most people think that gold comes from the ground, but it's actually a lot more interesting than that. Gold leaf comes from lumps of gold that are ancient. Now, gold itself comes from the universe. You have to have a star 1,000 times bigger than our own sun. And these stars only exist for a few million years and then they explode. They go supernova. And they release more energy in that moment than our sun will release in its entire lifetime. When they explode, they leave behind a neutron star. Now, a neutron star is a star that's so dense, all the space is squeezed out of it, so that it's just 17 kilometers wide, yet it has the same amount of mass or material as 2 million Earths squeezed down. That means that a date sized of a neutron star would weigh around 100 billion tons. This happens twice, and you have 2 neutron stars. And these stars have so much gravity, they smash into each other, and through nucleosynthesis, gold is formed. And it's sent across the universe as dust, and it will travel until it finds somewhere in the universe a cloud of gas collapsing under its own gravity and heating up. A star is born, like our sun, and then the dust and the debris from the star starts circling this new star, and the planets are formed. And gold goes to the centre of the planet, like our Earth, and rises up through the magma churning around inside. The crust cracks open and superheated vents of steam carry gold up. And then when it heals, we find gold running through quartz and other rocks, until eventually you can just pick up lumps of gold from riverbeds. So I like to think that when I'm gilding, I'm not just putting gold leaf onto precious items, but I'm actually using the soul of a star. Now, I'm going to give you a demonstration today to show you how you can do some gilding at home. I'm going to start off with something simple, using some easy metals: copper, a fake gold, and silver. And then I'm going to advance to the gold leaf. Now, in order to do this, I have prepared a black panel. This has got a coat of paint on it so that it's nice and even, and black's a really nice colour to work on because any metals that you put on the surface just look fantastic. The first thing I'm going to do is put some tape on the black panel to separate it into 16 areas. This will allow me to show you some different effects that can be achieved. Even though we're only going to have small areas that are going to have different leaves on them, it doesn't matter what you're gilding, you can do really large areas the same way. Just using the same process as I'm about to show you, you can change picture frames, furniture, anything you like around the home. It's great fun, it's really easy to do, and anyone in the family can try it. Now, in order to gild successfully, we use a special glue. And this glue here is called Wonder Size. All the materials that I'm using today are available from a company called goldleafsupplies.co.uk in England. They ship over to Qatar and anywhere around the world all the supplies that I'm using so that you can do these things at home. This glue is a special glue that doesn't ever actually dry. You paint it onto a surface and it will remain sticky until you put the leaf on there and gild. So I'm going to start off by putting some of this glue onto the panel. Just using this brush, I'm putting a thin layer of glue onto the surface, making sure that it's a nice, easy and even coat. This is done one square at a time, and I have to make sure there's no misses. Now, one of the great things about using this glue is it's got a special chemical in there that reacts with light and changes colour. So when you're applying it, it's got a bluey green tinge. However, it will dry clear. This blue-green tinge is just to allow you to see where you're applying it and make sure that you haven't got any of those misses. It doesn't matter what you're painting, you can gild anything this way, but the important thing is to make sure that you use the correct paints that you put on the surface. For instance, if you're gilding metal, you'll want to use a metal primer first before you put your coloured paint down and your glue on top. If you're using wood, use the correct wood primer, add some colour and put the glue on top of that. Anything can be gilded: plaster, stone, glass, wood, metal. The only limit you're going to find in gilding is your own imagination. As I'm applying this glue to the surface, you'll see that it's starting to go a little bit clearer on the first ones that I painted. This is where it's starting to dry. And once it's completely clear, I know that the paint is dry. Here in Qatar, it's not taking too long at all. This demonstration is using a black panel, but of course you can use any colour that you like. In history, red was used a lot behind gold. And the reason for that is gold leaf is beaten so thinly that light actually does travel through the leaf and affect its colour. When gilding upon a red surface, the red allows the gold to glow. It gives the gold a really nice warmth. Black gives you a much more unified colour. It helps to make the whole thing look really even. And I really like using black because I like to have some gaps in the gold so the black can show through. There's a lot of really nice decorative techniques that you can develop using this. If you wanted something to be really bright and really golden without any gaps at all, you would of course use a yellow background. And the yellow background will hide any tiny misses that you will have in the gilded surface. So there we go, there's the panel. The panel has now been completely covered with the glue, and that's going to take about 5 minutes to dry. Now, while it's drying, I'd like to talk to you about the metals that we're going to use. The 4 metals we're going to use in this demonstration are, the first one is copper. Now, I like copper. Of all the metals, there's only 2 colours really, and that's the red copper and the yellow gold. All other metals are silver coloured. So copper has a really special place in my heart. And I think that when you use it on the surfaces, you can get some really nice effects. What I also like about using copper is that it reacts with chemicals and you can create a whole range of effects using different chemicals on the surface. In fact, I'd like to show you some of those effects today. The copper, as you can see, can be held with the hand, but it is still incredibly thin. It just dissolves into dust if you put it through your fingers. The second metal is a fake gold. This is not real. So this is called composite or slag metal. And this is made by combining two metals together. And that's copper at about 80% and zinc at 20%. Together they form this colour. However, you really have to be careful because this contains 80% copper, meaning that it will tarnish if you're not careful. It will change colour. So whenever you work with copper and fake gold, if you want them to stay looking the same, you should seal them with a varnish and make sure that they're protected from being touched or from any chemicals on the surface. The other metal we're going to use is silver. The silver leaf is much thinner than the copper, but slightly thicker than the gold. The more expensive the metal becomes, the thinner we like to have it beaten because it saves money and it saves material. The silver is so thin though that it's not really sensible to use it with your hands. It would just break and dissolve into nothing. It's the same as the gold. The gold is so fine that that just dissolves, as you saw at the beginning of this video. And this is the fourth metal we're going to use, the gold. Now, in order to put the gold and the silver onto the surface, I'm going to use a selection of tools. The first thing we use is what's called a gilder's pad. Now, this pad has basically been covered with some soft material and has a cushion inside of it. It's soft and it allows you to put the gold on the surface and cut the gold. The gold is cut with a gilder's knife. This gilding knife here is double-edged, and it's really important that you don't touch the blade of the knife with your fingers, because the grease from your fingers will make the gold stick to the knife. So you've got to keep this really clean at all times. Now, because we can't pick up the leaf with our hands, we use another tool, and that's what's known as a squirrel tip. Now, a squirrel tip is made with squirrel hair from the tail, which is really fine. And the squirrel hair is so fine and light that it is able to pick up the leaf from a surface and be transferred onto another area without ripping the leaf. So it's really, really handy to use for when you're using gold, but it's not easy at first for the beginner, but it's great fun learning how to do it. The other kind of gold you can use is something called transfer leaf. Now, this transfer leaf comes from a company called Norris in Germany, and this is all available, as I say, from Gold Leaf Supplies in the UK. The gold in this book makes it easy to pick up because it's pressed against a piece of paper called transfer. And that means that you can pick the gold up, and when you put it onto the surface, you rub and it leaves the gold behind. What's really good about this is because it's on paper, it means you can cut it into strips, so you can do small areas at a time. And it's really good for a beginner as well, without having to fork out for these tools if you just wanted to try something simple. Now, the glue's still drying on here. We're a few minutes away, but I'll talk about the other projects that I'm going to be showing you today. It's not just for flat areas that you can gild, you can also gild things that have got curves on them. So what I have here is a selection of metal leaves. And these have been pre-painted with a black paint, and they also have a glue on the surface that I did earlier so that they're ready to show you how to gild on these too. The other material I'm using is something called Instacol. Now, Instacol is a yellow liquid that you can apply to a surface and you rub the gold onto it. I love this stuff. It gives a really, really nice finish. So just to show you the difference between in the other ways, I've applied some of this Instacoal in a standard way with a paintbrush onto this metal leaf, and it's had 2 coats. Instacoal can also be applied to paper. So if you take a piece of paper, you can write with Instacoal and create art. Now this liquid is yellow because it's going to have gold put on it. If you've got any tiny cracks or rips in the gold, of course you won't notice it because it's the same colour. But the best way to use this material is to place it onto the surface in a really generous manner. You don't want to apply it too thinly because you'll need body with this material to get that full shine when you apply the gold leaf later on. It can be applied in spots, it can be applied in lines. You can write script with this. You can cover entire areas with this. It's water-based, so it's very easy to clean the brushes afterwards. And once you apply, you leave it between 1 hour and 8 hours before you apply the gold on there. So what I've done to show you how this works is I have prepared a piece earlier, just with a few spots that I can show you what the next stage is. So this one has had a few hours to dry and it's going to be ready to use. So at this point, I'm about ready to show you how to use the gold leaf on the panel. As you can see, the colour's changed and it's all gone clear, showing that it's ready to be gilded. The first metal I'm going to start with is copper. This is pure copper and it can be picked up by the hand and placed onto the surface. You can apply it as large squares, but I find that quite boring. I like having a little bit of character and personality to the piece when I'm working. So I'm going to apply this in broken pieces. And this is done by just bouncing it onto the surface that I'm going to gild, like this. The copper is really inexpensive. It's readily available and it's really good for using on anything you like. As I say, picture frames is great, but if you're a keen gardener, gilding flower pots is also a great idea because it can prevent creatures from getting inside because they actually don't like the copper. So I'm just putting more and more of the copper onto the surface until it's almost covered. Now at this point, there's a lot of excess and there's a lot of gaps. So just by using my fingers, if I rub the surface, all the gaps get filled in with the copper. Nice and easy. The next metal I'm going to use is the fake gold. Now remember, this is made with 80% copper and 20% zinc. So this is going to behave in exactly the same way as the copper. And so I'm going to apply it in the same way. If you're doing a really large area, maybe something the size of this table, get a couple of books of this leaf, rip them up and put them into a pot. And then once you put the glue on the surface, you can just empty the pot on the top and just use your arms and rub it all over. You can get some really nice effects that way. Again, I'm just rubbing the leaf once it's coated to cover the surface. Because it's on a black background, there are some tiny gaps between the leaves that show through. And I really like that. It gives it like a marble-like quality. It's really decorative. Of course, if you wanted to do this and not have the black lines coming through, well, that's easy. You just paint the background yellow. The next metal I'm going to use is silver. Now, silver can't be used with the hands, so I'm just going to place this on the pad and use the squirrel tip to pick it up. Using the gilder's knife, I've just cut it into 4 pieces, and I'm just rubbing the squirrel tip on the back of my neck because the sweat from my neck is enough to pick the silver up onto the tip. I have 2 gaps here on the edge of 5mm on those 2 edges, and what that does, it allows me to put it on the surface without the hair touching the glue. So this is now brought down and onto the surface. As a beginner, you'll find it easier to cut the leaf down into smaller pieces when you apply it to the surface. But as you get better and your confidence grows, you can start using larger and larger pieces. Now, to make this more interesting, I'm going to put this one on with my fingers in the middle and rub it round. See what happens. It's so fragile that it's just going to break and dissolve on the surface. But this is a finish as well. You don't necessarily have to cover the whole surface. There's all kinds of decorative finishes that you can do. Another way of creating decorative finishes is to rip the leaf directly from the pad using a brush and apply it in pieces. The leaf is so fine that it almost acts like a liquid and fills in all the gaps as it moves over the surface. So here you can see I'm breaking off pieces and just filling in these gaps on the surface. Some of the leaf from the previous parts that I put in there have mixed in with the silver, and I kind of like that finish as well. In nature, gold and silver are often found together, and it's called electrum. So by mixing the two together on the surface, you have a whole new range of decorative finishes that you can create. Now for the final section, I'm going to put on the gold leaf. Now this is pure 23.5 karat gold. It has just a tiny bit of silver added to the gold, and that silver just gives it a bit of strength and makes it a little bit easier to use. But for all intents and purposes, this is as good as 24 karat gold. This is applied in exactly the same way, just using the squirrel tip. Again, I've got the two edges there, and I bring it down gently onto the surface. Now, gold leaf is a little bit smaller than the silver leaf. Silver is 8 centimetres, and silver is 9 centimetres, and gold is 8 centimetres. So it's a little bit smaller. As you can see, it's not going to cover the entire square. Now, I've been gilding for around 25 years, and even now, sometimes I'll have gaps on the surface. You can see that there's a bit of a gap here that I've got, but that's absolutely fine, because the joy of using this leaf is that if you have any excess on the surface, you can brush it around and it will fill in those gaps for you automatically. What do I mean by that? Take this brush here. Now, this brush is a squirrel mop. It's very, very soft hair, and when you gently move it over the surface, it will pick up tiny flakes of gold and move them onto the areas where there's no gold, because the glue is still sticky. So as I tamp this down, I gently shimmy it from side to side, and gold flakes move over and fill the gaps. If you need any more, just like the silver, you can also take the gold directly from the book by ripping the leaf in sections and placing them on those areas. And that's what I'm going to do with the rest of this one here. Ooh, okay, so some of the gold's dropped onto the silver there. Electrum finish. Whenever I'm doing something like this, I like to think that there's no mistakes in art. So even though a little bit is dropped in there, that's actually a really nice effect. And so to explore that, maybe I'm going to put some more around the outside edge of that. Let's see what happens. The only way you're going to create really good, distinct and individual art is by embracing your mistakes and viewing them as a learning curve. Instead of worrying when things go wrong or doesn't happen how you want it to, think to yourself, actually, this is a happy accident. What can I do to make this work? So I dropped some gold onto the silver there, and now I'm going to put gold over all of the gaps in that. This is a beautiful finish. I like this. Maybe I wouldn't have found that if I hadn't dropped some gold on that area. So what I'm trying to say is, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to explore all the different avenues of gilding. One of the big problems is that people teach you when you're doing arts and crafts that you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. And that really, it limits our creativity. It stops us creating new and wonderful things. It's only the brave people that are happy to go out and make mistakes and try things new that are going to create these new things. So don't be afraid to explore. Something else that can be done is you can roll gold directly onto the surface from the book. And this way helps to create a large area of gold. So if you're doing a large canvas, for instance, and you can, and perhaps you should, just put gold directly from the book onto the canvas so that you can have a golden background. Now, gold works really well with acrylics. It works fantastically with pencil drawings, pastels, watercolours. It can be added to all kinds of art to elevate your work. And again, don't be afraid to experiment. Mixing different metals together, trying different things, different coloured golds, is going to open up a whole world of finishes for you. So there we have a panel, and it's got loads of different kinds of metals on the finish. What I'm going to do, just to finish off on this final square, I'm going to put copper on. Well, why not? So I'm taking some copper with my fingers, and I'm just going to put that in the gaps of this one. When I started this video, I had no idea I was going to do that. That's freedom, that's art. That's what you've got to embrace. So now we have a panel with all the finishes. I'm just going to use a brush here and just lightly get rid of some of these flakes. So, with each of these rows, we've got 4 metals: copper, fake gold, silver, silver mixed, and gold, with a bit of copper. One of the next steps we can do is just by using isopropyl alcohol, and this is available from many local pharmacies and supermarkets, and I'm just going to rub some of this alcohol onto the surface. What happens is that when you put the alcohol onto the leaf, it encourages it to slightly separate, and all of those different gaps between the broken bits of leaf start to be accentuated and show through. And you start to get new finishes. This gives you a really nice, what I call broken leaf finish. It can almost look like marble. This is going to happen with each of the metals and give you different effects. Especially if you mix the metals together, that would be interesting as well. So in your own time, try some different combinations. Silver, being much thinner, rubs in a very different way, and the gold, being thinner again, will also come away in a very different manner. So now we have a nice distressed finish there. One of the reasons I also love using copper is copper's really reactive with chemicals. So I'm going to show you a couple of chemicals today and show you what it does to the surface. And the chemicals I'm going to use are sulfur-based. So the first one I'm going to use is called sulfurated potash. Now, sulfurated potash is a chemical that is sulfur-based and available in lumps. It dissolves in water, and what I did before I started is I put some into water to dissolve, ready to show you. So I'm just going to give that a stir. And get that ready. Because it's sulfur-based, it really smells. It smells like rotten eggs. But if you can get over that, it's really good because it can create really nice effects. But it really does have a pong, unfortunately. Right. So, just using a brush here, I'm just going to paint some of this liquid onto the surface. Immediately, we can see the effects that we get on there. And what this is doing is it's actually burning the copper. And you don't know what kind of a finish you're going to get. It's very organic. There's no control over this. And that's what I like about it, because each piece is going to be different. Now remember, I told you that the fake gold has got copper in there as well. That means it's also going to react with the chemical. There we go. And there's loads of different ways to apply this. You can apply it with sponge, you can apply it with brush, You can spatter it onto the surface. You can pour it onto the surface and put salt crystals in there. You can soak wood shavings in this chemical and sprinkle them on the surface and you'll get nice decorative finishes. Let's see if it does anything to the silver. Very, very slight difference to the silver. It's given it a slight yellowness. And also you'll notice where there's tiny flakes of the other metals that have gone into the silver, it picks up those metals and starts to create a really nice effect. And how does it react with gold? I'm going to put this on the gold and find out. It doesn't. In fact, what's interesting about gold is because gold is formed in the most violent things to happen in the universe, nothing damages gold. So it won't tarnish unless it's been mixed with other metals. Gold is really pure. Now the other one we're going to try is this one here, the sodium sulfide. Let's see what differences we get on this. I'll start again with the copper and a brush. And as we can see, this one's given us entirely different colours. This is a really bright, vibrant red there. And on the fake gold, much more subtle. The zinc in the fake gold is stopping it from reacting too quickly, so you get a very subtle finish. Silver, nothing yet. But look at the previous one. It takes a little bit of time, a couple of minutes, and it'll affect it. And once again, of course, on the gold, there's going to be no effect. So this is just a really nice, easy introduction to show you the kind of finishes that you can achieve using different metals on surfaces. Taking the tape off will give you an idea of the kind of effects that we're left with. And really, it's important for you to explore all of these areas at home and try new ways, different ways of creating your favourite decorative finishes on surfaces. Now, before I go, I just want to show you a couple of other quick things that you can do in gilding using the gold leaf. The leaves that I showed you about earlier, now these are 3D, so there's a little bit of a curve in them. How are we going to gild these? Well, it's quite simple. We'll just use the same technique that we did on the flat area, but we'll use a soft brush to push them into the grooves. So placing a piece of gold onto the gilding pad, I cut it into 4 squares and pick up each square and place them directly onto the leaf. Remember, this has already had the glue attached to it. Now, I'm putting these bits of gold on in a rough area from where the edges of the leaves are. There's going to be some gaps, but that's to be expected. Now that the gold is on the surface, I use my soft brush to tamp it down and to pick up the bits, the loose bits, and fill in the gaps. For some of those gaps on the outside edge, I'm just going to take pieces of gold directly from the book and place them on them, which makes it much more solid in an appearance and finish. And there we have a gold leaf. The other thing is, you don't have to coat the whole thing with gold to make it look nice. Just like before, putting bits on there in random sections can also have a really nice decorative finish. And that one has created a nice sparkly finish. The final one, this leaf here, has got the Instacole on the surface. And for this, I'm going to use transfer leaf. Transfer leaf, picked up very easily with the fingers, placed on the surface, and then just using my hands, I rub the leaf until it fuses with the gold. Once the gold is on the surface, I take a clean cloth and then gently move the cloth over the surface to burnish it and bring it to a high shine. This is one of my favourite ways of gilding. The Instacole system gives you an absolutely incredible shine when it's finished. There's nothing like it. There we go. That's the Instacole. If you compare the two together, you can see that the Instacole really outperforms all the other ways of gilding. Now remember that piece of paper we put some spots on earlier? Same thing. You grab some transfer, rub it on the surface where the spots are, and then using the cloth, once again, gently roll over the surface to bring to a high shine. And then we get that one as well. So, there we go. That's the end of our gilding demonstration there. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be absolutely fantastic to have more people explore gold and other things in their work. And it's an absolute pleasure to do this for the Ministry of Culture Qatar to enable you people at home to have a go at this ancient craft. Thank you so much.